To another episode of Rock Boys Football. Just spent my pretty much whole Thursday night mapping out some changes that I would like to see USC make over the next couple of weeks in the transfer portal. Now, one, it might tell you a little bit about my social life. Not a ton going on for the kid, but I think more importantly, we have a very good conversation on our hands in terms of what changes do we want to see USC make. Now, we're going to talk about two different things. One, going to kind of take a look at the depth chart, the projected depth chart that we'll have going into 2025. Talk about positions that we would like to see USC go out and address. But I also have some names that I think, some are in the transfer portal right now, but some I think very well could be in the transfer portal over the next couple of weeks, and talk about some of those names as well. Fired up to get into this one now for the USC fans. I think most importantly, let it fly in the comments section. The longtime listeners know we're going to be talking a lot about this program over the next couple of weeks. And I fully expect Lincoln Riley, this USC program, to get very aggressive. I think it's a must-win season for Lincoln Riley in 2025. And if they don't win and compete for a Big Ten championship, you're going to see the voices for Lincoln Riley's job get louder and louder. And I think rightfully so. And I think Lincoln Riley and this USC administration know that as well. And so I think you're going to see a very aggressive USC program in the transfer portal. Would love to hear some positions and some potential names that you guys have looked at in terms of where you want to see USC go in the transfer portal. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into this one. Let's start with the quick quarterback conversation, which we had earlier this week with all the buzz around Julian Lewis and flipping to Colorado. This is the ideal scenario, at least in my mind, for USC. And the picture is going to be a little bit more clear over the next couple of weeks. Jaden looks like the guy, right? You got 3 weeks to see what Jaden can do and have him show us what he can be for USC in 2025. In a perfect world, Jaden shows you a lot of good things that make Lincoln Riley and this USC staff say, yeah, we can win a lot of football games with this kid in 2025. And I think there's a really real shot of that. Like Jaden, from a pure talent standpoint, is one of the more talented quarterbacks that we see in the country. And on top of that, so you kind of know who your guy is going to be in 2025. On top of that, you want to go flip Hassan Longstreet. That's the perfect quarterback runway for USC, where it's Jaden as quarterback 1 in 2025, Hassan Longstreet behind him as a freshman. If you get that, I think you're really confident in terms of what USC is at the quarterback spot. Now, the probably unideal situation is Julian Lewis flips. You can't flip Hassan Longstreet, and Jaden Maeva doesn't really look like the guy in 2025. And in that case, you got to go heavy in the transfer portal. And I think one of the benefits of having Lincoln Riley as your head coach is there's going to be a lot of quarterbacks that are good in the transfer portal. I would think USC is swinging the biggest stick. They were swinging the biggest stick last year. I mean, they probably had Will Howard, from what I heard, like silently committed to USC. Miller Moss balls out in the bowl game. They decide to go with Miller Moss. There's no doubt in my mind that if USC wants to go and grab the best quarterback in the transfer portal, I would not be surprised if USC can get that done. That's kind of just what happens when you have Lincoln Riley as your head coach. Quarterbacks want to go play for him. Those are the kind of two situations that I see playing out. We'll get a better answer for how it turns out when we see Jaden play. If we see if Lincoln Riley can flip us on Longstreet, we'll continue to update that conversation. But that's kind of the scenarios that I see playing out. Now, you look at the rest of this USC depth chart, you go to the pass catcher room. If you can hold on to Jacoby Lane, Mekhi Levin, Deuce Robinson, and maybe even Zachariah Branch, even if Zachariah Branch transfers, I think USC will be okay. I really do like Jay Fair. And if Jay Fair comes back for his senior season, I think you got a good one there. And then true freshman Xavier Jordan, I think, can play at a really high level too. So in the wide receiver room, I think USC is going to be just fine. I actually really like what they have in 2025. I think this can be a really good unit for USC. And I get that wide receivers will be flashy. There will be some good wide receivers that hit the transfer portal this offseason. I think USC needs to do a really good job of saying, hey, we got to stick to the positions we need. Don't waste your time and resources going after, flashy players that might just make your team marginally better. Go out and make sure you're addressing the actual needs in the transfer portal, which we're going to get into right now. The running back room, I I think you're going to be okay with Quentin Joyner. Maybe you want to go add one veteran running back just so you're a little bit more experienced. But I think Quentin Joyner can be the guy in 2025. So again, I don't think that's a position of priority. And I know they like Brian Jackson as well as a true freshman. Biggest priority, and I don't think there's a doubt about this, is the offensive line. You look at what this offensive line might look like now. The good news for USC is Elijah Page is starting to look like the real deal at left tackle. He's quietly had a really good last couple of games. He's kind of what we expected him to be to start 2024. And so you have your left tackle. I think another conversation is, what does the development look like of someone like Tobias Raymond, who I think we're all really excited about, wasn't quite ready as a redshirt freshman. Can he be ready as a redshirt sophomore? Outside of that, I think you're looking to get at least one high-level starting tackle, and you probably want to grab one or two guys on the inside of the offensive line too. You're going to lose your two best offensive linemen, and Jonah and Emmanuel Pregnon. Now, a tackle that I think would be really interesting to see USC go after is Jake Taylor. Obviously, one, Lincoln Riley probably knows him after recruiting him to Oklahoma from Bishop Gorman. Really, really highly touted kid coming out of high school. Hasn't gotten a ton of opportunity, has battled some injuries at Oklahoma. Quite frankly, has not looked good his junior year for Oklahoma. But I continue to think, and I remember watching him in the spring game this year and say, this kid can play, especially at right tackle. And so if you have Elijah Page as your bookend left tackle, from at least a depth standpoint, I think Jake Taylor very well could hit the transfer portal, but more importantly, would be a really, really good addition for USC to make at that offensive tackle spot. So that's the name I have at offensive tackle. Going back to the depth chart, we'll get a better sense of where USC can go on the offensive line when we see guys hit the transfer portal. That was one of those names that I'm looking at some potential transfers and say that would make sense. I think Samson Okunlola, who's currently a sophomore in Miami, former five-star in Massachusetts, that's another name I think could hit the transfer portal. That's another name I could see USC pursue. I also wouldn't rule out some group of five offensive linemen who are really, really good. We've seen some group of five linemen make a nice transition to the power four level. That's kind of a example by example basis. So we'll kind of take a look at some of those names when they start hitting the transfer portal. Now, outside of the offensive line and outside of the quarterback position, which is kind of pending the next couple of weeks, I think USC should be just fine on the offensive side of the football. I think you have a loaded tight end room over the next couple of weeks. Really good pass catchers. If you can make sure you have a quarterback and an offensive line that can hold up at the highest level in the Big Ten, I think this USC offense is going to be just fine. I think the work that USC needs to do is on the defensive side of the football, and it obviously starts with the defensive line. Here you look at kind of this depth chart here and say, we're going to be losing a lot of guys, right? Gavin Mayer, Nate Clifton, Kobe Pepe, the three guys that have played probably the most on the defensive line. You're going to have to replace all three of them. And so you're going to have to replace not only depth, but I think USC needs a difference maker up front. I think one of the flaws with this USC defense is there's just not an elite player on this defensive line. I think there's a lot of solid players, but you need some game wreckers on the defensive line if you want to be great. And you look at the Georgia teams, you look at Michigan last year, you look at the impact a guy like Derek Harmon has had on this Oregon defensive line. You want to get depth, but you also want to have a game wrecker. And so that's kind of what we're looking at here. I will say Devin Tompkins is playing really, really good football as a redshirt sophomore. I think he has the chance to be very, very good going into year 4. You got some young edge rushers, guys like Braylon Shelby, Cam Fountain. I think Anthony Lucas will be back. That you feel, and Sam Green. Sam Green's played some really good ball too. So the edge rusher position, I feel pretty dang good about. Maybe you want to add one or two guys. Now, on the inside of the defensive line, that's kind of where you want to focus your energy. Now, let's go out and look at the number one player currently in the transfer portal right now. That's Jaheim Otis from Alabama. This kid's a monster. He's not only exactly what USC is looking for from a body standpoint at 6'5", 320. He is just an absolute mountain of a human being, but he's also a very, very good disruptor and pass rusher on the inside of the defensive line too. He's not a guy that is necessarily going to fill up the stat sheet, but he's a guy that if you are going to run the football, you have to make sure you're doing something special to deal with Jaheim Otis. I think one, he's the exact kind of football player that USC is looking for on the inside of the defensive line, and he's a really good one at that. Now he's transferring from Alabama after a really good 2023 season. I think a lot of it has to do with just the new coaching staff. And he played like 2 games early, decided to hit the transfer portal. This would be a massive, massive get for USC. I think another guy worth looking at on the defensive line, former Cali kid, Hiro Kanu, who another guy that on Saturdays hasn't necessarily been great. And I think he's just playing behind some really good football players at Ohio State. What happened with Ohio State is they had a bunch of guys that could have gone to the NFL and decided to stay for one more year. And so he's year 3 of his college football career still playing behind some really, really good football players. Now he's from California. He might be looking for a change of scenery to come back home. USC should be looking at a lot of these Cali kids that decided to go across the country. Like if they're not getting a lot of playing time, you got to try to bring them home to USC. I've been very vocal that USC's got to recruit Cali better. You can take another swing at these guys in the transfer portal as well. So Hiro Kanu, Jaheim Otis, 2 guys that I really like for USC on the inside. And then the last guy, this is a little bit more of an edge rusher, but I just think he's so good in that he's just rotting away at Stanford, is David Bailey. Nobody talks about David Bailey because nobody talks about Stanford. This kid, ever since his true freshman year, has been dominant. And I think they use him in such a poor, poor way. They put him as an off-ball backer, dropping him out into the flat. They don't let him rush the passer. This kid's a game wrecker. He's one of the better edge rushers on the West Coast right now. He's obviously from Mater Dei. If he wants to go play, with all due respect to Stanford, if he wants to go play, high-level college football, I think USC should be looking at this kid in an absolute heartbeat. And you see a lot of kids from Stanford, they want to go there, get that degree. If he's graduating this December and hits the transfer portal as a graduate kid, I think this would be a massive get for USC. Now, continuing to kind of work through this depth chart, you look at the off-ball linebacker spot and say, I like what USC has, right? You're going to lose Mason Cobb. You're going to lose Easton Mascarenas Arnold, 2 guys who've been solid, but they've not been great. Really, really high in Desmond Stevens. You're going to get Eric Gentry back. You're going to get Davis back. There's a nice little crop of linebackers, but there's not a ton of depth in the linebacker room. And I will say you have a lot of really good true freshmen coming in. Guys like Patai Togiai, Jaden Pilati, Ty Jackson. I think this linebacker room could be okay. If there's one guy I would take a look at is Blake Nicholson, who has started the majority of the games for Florida State. Now, Florida State's been a very bad football team this year, but this kid's from California, has played a lot of football the last 2 years. Really, really big upside to this cat. That's kind of what we talked about with him when he was coming out of high school. And he played both sides in the high school level, ran for over 4,000 yards as a running back. I think there's some serious bones to him. If USC is trying to add, because you're not getting a ton of experience back in the linebacker room. If you're trying to add some experience, Blake Nicholson could be a guy. Now, the last position you kind of look at in the secondary is saying, one, I think it depends on what Kamari Ramsey decides to do. Does he stay for one more year? Does he go to the NFL? But you look at the cornerback spot and say, even at the nickel, Greedy Vance gone, Jalen Smith, Jacoby Covington, John Humphrey, you're going to have to replace a lot of cornerbacks. Now, there are some cornerbacks who are young that I really do like on this roster, guys like Marcellus Williams. This is a guy I would take a look at. Utah is lost, I believe, 6 straight football games. Smith Snow, this Utah secondary is elite. I mean, they're allowing a 52% completion percentage, only 4.5 yards per pass. It's been one of the best secondaries in the country. Now, the interesting part about Smith Snowden is not necessarily Danton Lynn's kind of cornerback, right? Danton Lynn, we've talked about it, bringing in long, big, physical cornerbacks. Although Smith Snowden is not the biggest and longest, this kid is a very, very good football player, has been for Utah over the last couple of years, especially this year in 2023. I would not be surprised if Kyle Whittingham retires after the year. I would not be surprised if Utah sees a lot of guys that are leaving the program after this year. If Smith Snowden is one of them, I am pushing my chips in to get this kind of guy. Now, again, these are kind of the positions that I would like to see USC go out and get. And then I kind of just did a little kind of preliminary research on some names that I think are good that might be in the transfer portal. We'll get a little bit of a cleaner answer in terms of the targets and players that will be available over the next couple of weeks. This is kind of my early evaluation for USC. Would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. As names start hitting the transfer portal, we'll continue to update this list. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.